So this was the Swiss Family Robinson. Now I'm trying something a little different with this book where I'm taking my thoughts and commentary and putting them in a separate video separate from the chapters so that you can see them individually. Now, I loved the Swiss Family Robinson as a child. I read this book when I was second or third grade. I don't remember how old I was. I do remember the book coming from the library in this plastic cover over the actual dust jacket. It was this big, heavy book, and I just, I was happy to be reading a big, heavy book, and it was a great book. And Disney made a movie out of this called The Swiss Family Robinson, released in 1960, which is a fun movie. Now, this book, the name Robinson in this is not the actual name of the family. I've heard that it's not actually used anywhere in the book, but there was a type of story that was popular in the 1800s that was based off of Robinson Caruso. Now, Robinson Crusoe is the prototype for this story. Robinson Crusoe is about a man who gets stranded on an island and then proceeds to just build and build and build. And so this story is along that line, except instead of being one man, this is a family from Switzerland. So this is a Swiss family doing their Robisonian. And the original book was written in German because German is one of the primary languages of Switzerland, and this book was written in German, and this is a translation into English. And so we have the Swiss Family Robinson, and they are off on their adventure. They were going off to colonize someplace. That was the thing to do. They may have been moving to Australia, I think was the plot originally. I can't remember. It may be brought up later, but they were traveling from Switzerland to a foreign country, and the ship wrecks, and all of the sailors abandon them. Now, this is a nice little plot device where you have the family off on their own without the experience of the sailors, and so this sets it up as clearly being them versus themselves and them versus nature. So in writing, you have conflicts. And there are some very classic ones. There's man against man, there's man against nature, man against himself. So here we have man against nature, where here they're struggling to survive in a strange country. They have stuff from the shipwreck. There are some things to eat there. Flamingo, penguins. Penguins, I've heard, taste like fish. Probably because they eat fish. Turns out that things taste a lot like what they eat. Because it just sort of carries down. This goes back to the whole DDT building up and the things building up in one of the Moby Dick videos. I can't remember which chapter. There was like 150 of them. So one of those chapters I talked about biological accumulation. And anyway, but there's penguins, there's flamingos. Both of those are edible. The agouti, edible. It's a large rodent native to North America, which is in the northern hemisphere, and penguins are in the southern hemisphere. There are no penguins in the southern hemisphere. They only get up to about the equator, but they get close to the equator. So we have some geography problems here, but that's okay because that's not important. What's important is that here you have this family, and they're trying to survive, and they're trying to rebuild. And so they have limited supplies, and they're going to have to deal with that. And they have a broken gun already. So, they only have so much of these things. It's like a gun is not something you can go off and make. So they already broke one of their guns because Fritz lost his temper because he took the agouti and he just kind of laid it there, and the dogs were like, meal? I mean, you know what it's like. Dog, you leave food lying around, the dog is going to eat it. So he got mad, bent his gun, beat up on the dogs. And I mean, if he's lucky, the dogs will eventually come back and, realize that this was a one-time thing. But he very well could have just run off the dogs permanently and caused all sorts of more problems. But tonally, that doesn't fit with the book. Anyway, so here you have a bunch of people who need to learn to be better about themselves. They're also going to have to learn to survive because, we already have Ernest, who's a bit arrogant and not willing to go into the water and not willing to, work hard. We have Fritz, who has a temper, who needs to work on it. So here we have these people who really need to learn and improve themselves if they're going to survive. And they're going to have to work together if they're going to survive. Now, there's all these other little interesting little tidbits in the book, like a lever. And Father says he'll explain how it works. And the way a lever works is that you trade off force for distance. So in the equations, if you're to take a look at the math, the amount of work done is constant. Now, work is related to energy. So energy is maintained, work is maintained because work is a form of energy. And work is equal to the force you apply times the distance it travels. So if you do a light push for a long distance, that's the same amount of work as a hard push for a short distance. So what you do is you take a lever, and you have a fulcrum, and then you have a lever. And you have a long end and a short end. So you take the long end and you move it a long distance, and the short end, my elbow there, only moves up a little bit. And because you have a long distance and a short distance, that means that you have to trade something off so that the same amount of work is done on both sides of the lever. Because, a lever can't make work. So same amount of work has to be done on both sides. So because you move a long distance, the little force, that means you have a big force on the other side, which is how levers work. And Aristotle, I think. I'll have to look it up. I'll put in the comments if I'm wrong. I probably am wrong. So give me a lever long enough and a place to lay it, and I shall move the world. So the whole idea is that if you have a lever long enough, all you have to do is this infinitesimal force to move the whole world. But that doesn't really work. Anyway, because no lever is perfect. Archimedes. Thank you, Lolly. Lolly pointed out that it was Archimedes, which is much better because Archimedes was an engineer and Aristotle was just a philosopher. So Archimedes, far cooler than Aristotle. And I apologize, Archimedes. Yeah, Archimedes, far cooler than Aristotle. Anyway, this is a Swiss Family Robinson. They're stuck, much like Gilligan. But you know what? They have a whole bunch of professors. So they're going to be okay.